So my name is John McConnin. I'm an attorney and a broker, and today we're going to ask AI to help guide us in the future of real estate. This is a serious situation. I've seen a couple of for sale signs. It's been a slow market, but I'm just wondering how a realtor could possibly counsel a seller about selling their home in the current marketplace. Let me suggest to you that this is a major issue for realtors. What if during these settlements in the next few months, if there are settlements, the National Association of Realtors or Keller Williams or RE/MAX agree that they're no longer going to be offering compensation to buyer's agents, or that they're going to allow sellers to offer compensation to buyer's agents, but they're not going to do it themselves. Can you imagine what the seller is going to be thinking, or a seller's lawyer or someone counseling the seller? Hey, those realtors just got sued for $1.7 billion, and now they want to move that liability over to you, right? Now, if the only liability that was being litigated here was liability with respect to the practice of driving up prices on consumers, maybe. But there are other class action suits on behalf of buyers right now. And the inevitable is going to be, are the questions, why were you compensating my buyer's agent with my money? That's one of the quotes I've read, driving one of the plaintiffs in these class action suits. So if you're driving up the cost of me and you're paying my agent. So ethically, is it okay to advise, for a realtor to advise their seller on the issue of buyer compensation and offering buyer compensation directly? I submit to you that every time a buyer is unhappy, let's say prices go down. We know last time it went down, 2008, 2009 market, lots of buyers wanted outs. They wanted money back. They went to see lawyers about suing to get out. We know that sometimes, even now, in good markets, when buyers discover problems with the homes, they're hoping they can go back and find a problem with the disclosures or go back and get some money out of the sellers. And now, with these class action suits questioning the validity of the payment by the seller's agent, which is the agent is an agent of the principal who's the seller, with these seller agents and brokers compensating buyer's agents and brokers, even if it's not a class action suit, these buyer suits are going to have a lot more merit until this is all settled out. So I don't see how real estate agents can be hoping that this is all going to resolve quickly. So as a little background, I'm going to go ask Google Bard some questions. Especially, we're going to start with the RE/MAX case and what the RE/MAX CEO said. And then I'm going to ask it questions. I think I've typed it out. Yes. Are agents going to be protected by the settlement of these suits? Are practices going to change? What are the possible outcomes? Is it ethical for seller's agents to compensate buyer's agents? Is it ethical for seller to compensate a buyer's agent? What about... Okay, so I'll explain this later. It's been a suggestion by a lawyer that we're going to see it as seller concessions. What will happen then? Now, I don't know if AI can answer that, but we'll talk about likely outcomes. We'll talk about risks of future lawsuits. I'm going to explain why we're having all these problems. It's basic, and they will go away when they're handled properly. And I know it's going to sound self-serving, but I've made far more money as a realtor than a lawyer. I'm not, while this is going to suggest that this really is full employment for lawyers, and lawyers should rightly be involved in these, I don't mind either way. I don't really, I think I prefer that it's done properly. Actually, I know, internally, I know that this is a much better process when it's done properly, and it hasn't been. Forms do not replace lawyers. Every time a lawyer should have been involved, realtor associations create forms, and they let realtors act like they're allowed to counsel people on these issues. And we know some realtors do, but some realtors don't. They're like, they know their limitations, but lots of realtors have been doing so even online for years and years. And maybe the end of all this will be that we have a proper division of labor in the sale of what is frequently people's largest asset, with by far their largest amount of equity. So now let's start. So we're going to ask those other questions, but just make sure this is going to be relevant. I wanted to make sure that Google Bard was up to speed, because I know some like GPT data sets were trained on data up until 2 years ago, but recently, the more recent ones have been trained up to recent data, and I don't know how recent Google Bard's been trained, but it seems like it's pretty recent. So I asked, what did the CEO of RE/MAX recently say about the settlement of real estate class action suits? So the stuff that's relevant here is business practice changes. This is very, very good of Bard to include this, because although it's not directly, no, it is a good response. While Bailey stated that many of the agreed upon, I'm sorry, I just had some sparkling water. While Bailey stated that many of the agreed upon business practice changes were already being implemented, he did not elaborate on specifics. The most important question here is compensation of buyer's agents, because they were suing on antitrust reasons with respect to buyer agent compensation. Now, I wanted some clarification. Yes, did the CEO of RE/MAX state that its agents, brokers, and franchise owners would no longer be the subject of lawsuits? I presume Google understood that. While the CEO of RE/MAX did not explicitly state, this was good because I was too general, brokers and owners would never be the subject of lawsuits, the settlement agreement does offer protection from claims related to specific lawsuits and similar claims going forward. And isn't that the detail right now? What are similar okay, so the class would be sellers, I believe, in the Burnett suit. And I know NAR and others are trying to include the buyers in there. So the class, hopefully, their thinking would be buyers and sellers, if they can get them all grouped together. And similar claims going forward. What are similar claims? And what is the class? Is it the class of Missouri? Would it be based on federal concepts of antitrust? Or would it also impact class action suits on a state-by-state basis? I don't see, the lawyer, I've done some research, but, from what I learned in school, what I've learned over the years, I had a couple friends like 15, 20 years ago that were class action lawyers, and I used to talk to them a little bit. I've traded stocks for a long time, paid attention to class action lawsuits. I remember one time my dad was in one of those classes, and I learned about it then. He was in one of the classes who got screwed by the CEO, not revealing things while selling shares. So my basic background in class action suits is that the lawyers want to get as many people into the class as they can. We've all said, given those forms, like if you opt in, you'll probably make $30. If you opt out, you can go on your own. So the classes are sometimes limited, and frankly, I don't see how these antitrust claims could also take care of all these other issues related to buyer compensation, which is why everyone's so vague, including Bailey. That we know the plaintiffs' lawyers are going to get there, and they want this practice to stop, the compensation of buyers' agents by sellers' agents. So that we're going to get to that question. So therefore, does that mean it's okay for the sellers to compensate for the buyers' agents themselves, or the sellers to even offer compensation to buyers? We're gonna cover that. We'll see what Google Bard has to say too. Now here's my next question. Would you explain the impact of a settlement of class action suit related to Burnett, and would other class action suits in state courts and actions brought on behalf of plaintiffs instead of sellers? I typed too quickly. Predicting the exact impact of Burnett settlement on other class action than individual lawsuits is difficult as various factors come into play. However, we can explore potential scenarios. Good work, Bard. Precedent, strength of individual cases would be settlement pressure. The Burnett settlement might pressure RE/MAX to settle other similar suits. Limited impact, individual lawsuits brought by sellers. Limited to no, I would say. Legal strategy, some sellers might use Burnett settlement as leverage in their negotiations with RE/MAX and others. It's not just RE/MAX, but Google took it with respect to RE/MAX. It's not binding, no guarantee, and here's the deal. Consult a lawyer, right? That's what's going to have to happen. Now I'm going to go with these questions. We'll ask Bard, and we'll say, in general, will real estate agents and brokers be at risk if they advise sellers to compensate buyer's agents in light of these recent class action suits, particularly those brought on behalf of buyers. Now, what would I think if I just asked this question and I'm an attorney? How would I respond? Well, first of all, I'd say that in general, the larger you go up the food chain with respect to real estate agents and brokers, so the franchises, the more likely they could be part of class action lawsuits. As you go down the food chain, the initial suits might not include the agents, but if the suits turn out to be winners, in state courts particularly, I could imagine eventually all the lawyers will get on the act, and many listing agents could be sued, depending on how the larger lawsuits go and whether they can turn them all into a class. So I would like to see that response. It becomes less likely as you go down the line in general. Now there's also a second component to this, and I'll cover that in the next question. So let's see what Google Bard has to say right now. Bard's thinking. Whether real estate brokers will be at rest for advising sellers to compensate buyers agents in light of the recent class action suits, particularly those brought on behalf of several nature of the advice. Specific practices. The specific practices involved in the advice are crucial. If the advice encourages practice explicitly addressed in the settled class action lawsuits, like setting minimum commission splits or prohibiting cooperation with non-cooperating brokers, there could be increased risk. Compliance with regulations, advising practices that violate existing real estate regulations or fair housing laws would pose a higher risk. Well, that's not changed. So far, it's pretty general. Transparency and disclosure. We know that they keep talking about transparency. Advising with full transparency and disclosure about the potential risks and benefits associated with compensating buyer's agents can mitigate some risk. Okay, so explaining where the money goes is going to be mandatory, I think, for both buyers and sellers. Minimum. Well, that's not even a minimum. That's just one part. It's not. It doesn't even come close to the minimum. Individual liability, broker policies and procedures, standard of care, precedent. Overall, it's difficult. Let me ask this more specifically: are real estate agents licensed to give advice to sellers about okay, so let's try this. Is there potential liability to home sellers for offering compensation to buyers agents? Please think about the potential compromise of a buyer agent's fiduciary responsibility to buyers, and who should be responsible for compensating their own agent. I'm not even sure what direct liability is, but while there isn't direct liability for home sellers simply offering compensation to buyers agents, there are potential challenges. Compromised fiduciary duty. Offering compensation to buyers agents raises concern about compromising the agent might be incentivized to prioritize a deal. Antitrust concerns. The recent class action suits. Okay, we know fair housing, transparency, all parties involved, shifting responsibility. consulting professionals. Both sellers and buyers should consult with their respective real estate agents and potentially legal professionals to understand the nuances of compensating arrangements and potential risks, especially in light. Okay, so I want to ask what they mean by there isn't direct liability to home sellers. Why did you write that there is not direct liability to home sellers? Okay, you're right. My previous statement regarding no direct liability for home sellers offering compensation to buyer's agents could be misleading. The situation is more nuanced and warrants further explanation. While there may not be clear-cut legal precedent establishing direct liability for simply offering compensation, there are potential legal and ethical risks that home sellers and their agents should be aware of. Antitrust concerns, fair housing, breach of fiduciary duty. If the seller's offer incentivizes the buyer agent to prioritize the seller's interests over the buyer's interests, that's exactly right, it could be considered a breach of the agent's fiduciary duty to their client. This could lead to ethical complaints against agent, potential lawsuits from the buyer, and reputational damage to the seller and their agent. Shifting responsibility and transparency. While traditionally buyers are responsible for compensating their agents, offering compensation to buyer's agents effectively shifts some of that responsibility to the seller. It's crucial to ensure full transparency. Evolving legal landscape. That's a very good point, because I was going to get to this, but we'll just cover that right now. If in the next few months or years it's determined that that real estate agents, listing agents, can no longer offer compensation to buyer's agents, then the question is it ethical for sellers to do that? I mean, if their agent can't do it, why can the principal? And consequently, if these compromise, I know they're going to be very careful about saying, we're not admitting liability, but if the whole practice changes in the future, or somehow during these lawsuits, it's found out, it's determined legally that they are responsible for the damages they've caused because they've been breaching their fiduciary duty by offering compensation to buyer's agents, what will that do? Okay, so let me just read exactly how they said that. The legal landscape surrounding real estate transactions and agent compensation is constantly evolving, particularly regarding buyer agency and potential conflicts of interest. It's essential to stay informed about these developments and seek legal advice if needed. Now, here's the kicker. Could a real estate agent be sued because they offered advice regarding buyer agent compensation and its risks without ensuring that their seller or the buyer had spoken with an attorney? Okay. It's unlikely. Well, it's unlikely for a real estate agent to be sued directly. I would agree for simply offering about buyers. Let me say this. Alternatives and safeguards. Focus on disclosure and education. Recommend legal consultation. Stay updated on legal developments. Legal risk. Indirect liability. While unlikely, if the advice leads to demonstrably harmful consequences due to negligence or misinformation, the agent could face indirect liability through lawsuits against the seller or buyer. That's the point, right? So I see these scenarios. So if after a sale and a buyer is unhappy with the purchase, let's say the price for the home went down significantly. Currently it's January 2024. No, it's February 2024. And there are spots in the United States where I've spoken with people, like in Arizona, where prices are probably going down. I know if you look at my home in Poway in San Diego, if you look at the automated valuation models, my home is down from the heights during COVID. So I think there's a chance many homes are down in the last year or two. I know in Palm Springs, because of changes in Airbnb rules, prices could be going down significantly right now. So we know from the last real estate market sell-off that buyers talk to lawyers about getting out of lawsuits when the homes go down. They'll also look for disclosure issues and other things when their properties. I get calls frequently from people who are concerned that something wasn't disclosed to them and now it's a problem. And, you know, I've done videos on why disclosures are important to protect sellers and inform buyers. And if done well, it doesn't harm, almost never harms that price level unless it's really significant. And I have had a few people say, well, I don't want to say that. And I'm like, well, then we're not going to work together. But most people, when they disclose well and properly, it doesn't impact, it makes their home even more obvious because most people figure it out anyway. So it looks like they were doing the right thing and disclosing. That's a side thing, but if sellers are going to be brought into lawsuits and the agent advised them to compensate a buyer, that agent's going to be named by a lawyer. If the person's going to defend themselves or they have a lawyer and they have insurance, they're going to bring the agent in. So I just finally, let's just make this clear. Are agents licensed to discuss the risks, the legal risks of offering compensation to buyers' agents? Whether real estate agents are licensed to discuss the legalities of offering compensation to buyer's agents is a complex question with no simple answer. I disagree, but of course, I'm an attorney, right? Real estate agents are licensed to perform specific tasks related to buying and selling properties, including marketing, showing properties, and negotiating transactions. Giving legal advice is not typically within their scope of their license. It's not at all. Disclosure and intent. If an agent simply discusses the existence of the legal complexity surrounding buyer-agent compensation, advisors are calling to seek legal counsel for specific guidance, they are likely acting within ethical boundaries. 100% agree. However, if an agent offers definitive legal opinions and interpretations about the practice, it could be considered practicing law without a license and unethical. Okay, good work, Google Bard. Local regulations on standards. State and local regulations and professional guidelines might further clarify. Some jurisdictions might have specific rules outlining. And eventually, California Association of Realtors will try to create forms. Right, but those forms will always have that disclaimer, seek advice of counsel. Okay. Again, this is really good advice. We're going to be talking about that in the future. The priority, the transparency, and transparency means good information. And my point, and you'll see in some of the documents I've created for my brokerage going forward, it's not just transparency. We're not just saying we're doing it. We're going to have buyers agree that they're accepting compensation for their agent. And we're going to ask that in writing. I'm going to advise my sellers that we should be seeking that in writing. And as a bonus, we would say, I don't know how this is going to shake out because costs are involved and it depends on where my sellers want to go with this. But I would tell my clients, if it were me and I'm selling a property that's expensive as they are in San Diego, I'm going to want a buyer to have said they spoke with an attorney have it basically certified. They spoke with an attorney. They understand the pros and cons of allowing compensation to their agent, and they're accepting the compensation of their agent instead of trying to negotiate a lower price for themselves. I'll get more into that detail in future videos on a step-by-step process, but it goes hand in hand with the way the listing process is going to work, the way the marketing is going to be, and where the homes are going to be negotiated if there are multiple offers. Now, all this goes out the window when there's just one offer, but that's not that common in my markets. I mean, there's not long periods of time where there's only been one offer. I mean, it's usually there's either multiple offers or almost no offers. And the no offers was just for a limited bit of time during the short sales, during the foreclosure crisis. If a client inquires about the legalities, agents should acknowledge the complexity of the issue and potential legal implications, encourage the client to consult with a qualified legal professional for guidance, provide resources, recommendations. Absolutely, I agree. Well done, Google Bard. Now, Let's see if I've covered all these questions now. Practice is going to change. Well, I'll discuss those in further, but yes, I think that practices should change because, for instance, we're seeing some attorneys working for associations saying that they think that in the future there'll be spots and the MLS will be set up directly so that the compensation goes from seller to buyer, maybe as a concession that they can discuss. And that's going to go right into a best practice for how to sell a home. It's the way I've been talking about. One of the coolest things when you have an opening home weekend and you're accepting offers rather than just the first 2 or 3, but you say, we'll discuss all our offers with the people who sold them on Sunday. Everyone will have a chance. We'll talk to everybody. We're not intending to take one and not the other. Everyone's going to have a shot, and they'll know where we are and what the sellers are looking for. We're just taking them in on Sunday because we're having an open house Saturday, and we told agents they would be there. Now, what happens is sometimes people work directly with me, the listing agent, or one of the agents in my office. Sometimes they have a buyer's agent, and sometimes they just say, well, we'd like money for a lawyer. And you can rank those, what's the net? Your client might be concerned about the net. I advise my clients if they're protected by an agent or a lawyer, that's probably a good thing. Those buyers tend to be easier to work with, happier about the situation. They don't play as many games. So we'll discuss all this in other videos. Possible outcomes. I think the way homes are going to be sold will change. We all think that it's likely buyer's agents' compensation will go down. For instance, if you're already spending, let's say $1 million for a home and it's a stretch, and there's 2 or 3% give back, and you're thinking you'd like new floors or I didn't say wife, I'm sorry. My wife likes new appliances, but I know men do too. I certainly appreciate a nice kitchen. And I'm not going to say and a grill. But yeah, it's human nature. If I see 2% and I'm like, I can have that 2% and work with the listing agent directly, or I can take that 2% and pay a lawyer $2,000. Am I really going to, after I've done the work, found the house, and gotten this close, am I really going to pay a buyer's agent? So buyer's agent's compensation is going to go way down. I think full employment lawyers, for experienced lawyers who can work with the forms and the contracts and know how to not blow up deals, massive opportunity for lawyers. Is it ethical for sellers agents to compensate buyer's agents? We discussed some of that. It's an open question. Same thing with 5. Is it ethical for a seller to compensate a buyer's agent? I think there's a worry that you're compromising the duties of a buyer agent, so I wouldn't do it unless the buyer is certified to have spoken with an attorney. Let's put it that way. I'll roll out a program with 2 sets of levels of protection eventually. What about a seller concession? I think that was already covered. Buyers will take the money. Likely outcomes, we're going over that. Risk, here's the other issue that I see, that now I'm concerned about offering. I advise my clients, especially if it's in a strong market with multiple offers, I'm like, well, you're not trying to get too much money here. You're getting, everyone knows the price of this house is worth that. You're going to receive offers, or you have received multiple offers. These people don't need a buyer's agent. Am I, a real estate attorney and a broker who has definitely double-sided transactions in the past? Double-siding is realtor speak, is industry speak for representing both buyer and seller. Doing it ethically, disclosing both sides, saying, I don't know what their bottom line is. I don't know what their bottom line is. I tell my clients, I don't even want to know it, so I can't compromise them on the issue of price. I've made sure ahead of time my sellers are disclosing everything. I make sure my sellers know what I'm going to be disclosing because that's in my disclosure package. So we already know that we're agreed. So then the question is, do you want me to represent buyers? It's good because I can hammer lenders. I'm going to tell my buyer that if I'm working with their lender and their lender's a problem, I'm going to explain that to the seller. So I get all those conflicts out. But really now in this new market, if I'm selling a home for 2% or 2.5% and I'm not getting paid as the buyer's agent, what am I going to do? I'm right now thinking, at the moment, until all this fleshes out, I think that I would want my buyer to definitely have an attorney representing them or a realtor willing to work for attorney money, and that I would want to send and communicate with that agent or that lawyer directly unless I've decided, and under circumstances I might, that I'm also going to be representing the buyer. But for now, I want an attorney on that other end to insulate. I care about my business going forward. I care about my assets. I care about what Phil in my office who wants to work. I care about what he's going to do, and I know he's even more risk averse than me in many issues. I see a lot of these issues being solved by making sure the buyer's properly, if not represented, properly counseled, but maybe both. Now, why are all these problems? Well, it goes back to something that I was from. My mom worked for an attorney, and my mom did a lot of things. She was a college graduate. But at one point in time when we were in Connecticut, in Greenwich, I grew up in Greenwich. She wanted a part-time job. She represented as sort of like a paralegal, lawyers at the closing table. So there were lawyers in Florida. I wouldn't have even considered buying or selling a house without bringing a lawyer, and the lawyers frequently sold the title insurance, brought lawyers in to represent, help answer questions. Even though I'm an attorney, and at the time I passed the bar in Florida, and I wasn't a broker there. I was a regular agent. I made sure that my clients worked with, they could have gone direct to title companies. But I was like, for the same price, you can have attorneys that work for, have their own practice, and the attorney, and the fees were marked up, basic title insurance, and then there was the price that the retail market paid. So lawyers got compensated on that fee. I was like, why not take advantage of that? Everyone's always got questions. And luckily too, because there were times when it was important, even with a family member who started spinning and going south. I was so happy, that I was like, you can talk to the attorney. I don't care if you blow up the deal. Talk to that attorney. It was really important. So the problem is that for years, every time a legal issue came up, forms were created that tried to get around the need for people to be properly advised in the transaction. Well, advice is dynamic. Issues changes. The forms don't really do justice to the complexities of the situation. When you're dealing with a $1 million home and a $25,000 fee, there's room for an attorney in there to help out, make sure the seller or the buyer is doing things well, and in the end, it comes back down to something my dad, who was an attorney back east, used to say. He bought his suits. He loved the commercial, and I've said this in one or two other videos. He loved the commercial from Cy Sims, who said, "An educated consumer is our best customer." Sims was saying because they're selling great suits at discount prices, not garbage suits at discount prices. So his point was, an educated consumer is our best customer. Tremendous line. But in real estate, the transactions have always gone smoother when my clients ask a lot of questions that are answered in the beginning. A well-counseled client loves real estate, loves the transaction, likes what's going on. One that doesn't, and then, there can still be, I've had buyer's remorse, and I can counsel myself. The buyers are going to, when they're buying a big house, it's a big amount of their disposable income or their savings and their monthly payments, there's going to be some buyer's remorse. That's where agents can actually help, and a well-counseled client can help. So anyway, my name is John McConnin. I'm a real estate attorney and a broker. I have, this is probably going to be the beginning of information at sellersoptions.com, but I haven't set that up yet. You can find us at winnerscheck.com. That's where I've been. That's what I've been saying on this channel for years. But I'm going to break it out going forward to buyers and sellers. So the seller side is going to be sellersoptions.com. Thanks, John McConnin. Any questions, please? It's Sunday evening. There's big snow at Mammoth. I'm going away for a few days. I'm going to try to do this series just over my phone, talking into it while I'm up there, if I'm not so tired from hopefully 3 or 4 feet, maybe 5 feet of snow, going up there with my oldest son and maybe my 18-year-old son too. My wife doesn't want to go. But I'll try to read the comments if you make comments. All right, thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.